29th of July 1976, New York, USA. 18-year-old Donna Lauria and her 19-year-old friend Jody Valenti had returned home after a night out. As they sat talking outside Donna's apartment, a man approached and fired 5 times into their car.
They represented everything that he hated, everything he resented. They were people with their lives ahead of them. They were out having fun.
Donna died instantly and Jody was seriously wounded. The gunman was 23-year-old David Berkowitz, a delusional loner who christened himself the Son of Sam. He took 5 more young lives in just a year.
Some people called it the Summer of Sam. It captivated everyone. It created fear. The frenzy of activity was like nothing I'd ever seen.
People genuinely were afraid to go out. You cannot overestimate or exaggerate just how much that fear gripped the city.
The killings prompted the largest police manhunt that the city had ever seen.
What he did to those families, they've been devastated and never got over what happened to their children. Bad times. It was bad times.
Berkowitz was a serial killer who had an obsession with the occult. He murdered and maimed 13 young people in just over a year, spreading panic across the city that never sleeps. That makes David Berkowitz one of the world's most evil killers. April 17th of April, 1977, New York. When courting couple Valentina Suriani and Alexander Esau were shot dead, a letter to the chief of police from their killer, Son of Sam, was left at the crime scene. With 5 young people now murdered, detectives knew they had a serial killer on the loose. A wave of fear descended on the city, as former reporter Brian Cates remembers.
These series of shootings really did grip the city. People avoided going out late. This was a time of sex, drugs, and disco, and many of these shootings were involved in lovers' lanes and around discos. So you began to sense this growing fear, particularly among young women. People could talk about nothing else.
The fear of Son of Sam was fueled by a battling press, hungry for the latest scoop on one of the biggest ever stories to hit the city.
I was in New York in the 1970s, and the crimes literally hypnotized the city. They were everyday tabloid headlines. Son of Sam terrorizes people afraid in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. It was as though the city was afraid to take a breath. It literally grabbed the imagination of New York.
At the height of the killings, New York City Police Department had 75 detectives and 225 patrolmen working to hunt down the killer. A former detective on the case, Bill Gardella, remembers how the hysteria even led to women changing how they looked.
Once it was determined that he was targeting young females, and maybe by coincidence they had long brown hair, women were going to the beauty salons, buying wigs, blonde wigs, or dyeing their hair. No case can match the frenzy and the fear of the Son of Sam killings.
At a time when New York was the murder capital of the US, even Berkowitz's killings left an indelible mark on the place known as Fear City.
If you think at the time that this happened, women's liberation, rights for women, but all of that freedom, all of those liberties were suddenly curtailed because there was this monster on the loose.
This killer story begins on the 1st of June 1953, New York. David Berkowitz arrived into the world under the name of Richard David Falco. He was born out of an affair between his biological mother, Betty, and a married Long Island businessman called Joseph.
she became pregnant. He essentially said that he would not adopt the child, he would have nothing to do with the child, and David was given up for adoption.
He was adopted by Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz. They renamed him David.
They were a middle-aged couple, Jewish, working class, and they had no children. So I think this was a family which was set up for happiness, really. You have this childless couple, you have this baby that needs a home.
At the age of 7, David learned the hidden truth through a slip of the tongue.
He heard the word adopted from his adoptive father, and they had to explain to him what that term meant.
I think that probably made David very, very uncomfortable. I don't think he could grasp it.
Soon the happy-go-lucky child became disruptive and difficult.
At one point, I understand, they enlisted the help of a therapist or a psychologist to deal with his disciplinary problems, both at home and at school.
Berkowitz never really gets along with his peers. He doesn't form particularly healthy relationships with them. He's a kid who always flies off the handle. He has poor behavioural control, so he becomes increasingly isolated.
But at the age of 14, Berkowitz's world fell apart.
His adoptive mother dies from cancer, and he's facing a loss here. But I think the culture at that time was still very much, we don't talk about our feelings, so this would not have been a helpful thing for him.
A few years later, his father remarried. David was not happy about that. It made him angry, and this is where we begin to see the growth and real rage in his personality.
On the 23rd of June 1971, at the age of 18, Berkowitz joined the army to escape the strains of home. Here he learned to use weapons, including the M16 rifle, and trained as a sharpshooter. Whilst he was serving, he chillingly wrote in a letter home to a friend, "All of these courses will come in handy one day." He cryptically ended his letter by writing, "One day there will be a better world."
Berkowitz wrote saying, "I've learned things in the army and I'm going to use them." Well, it's maybe a bit of bluster, but maybe also a horrifying first note in what would become a desperately criminal career.
After 3 years, Berkowitz decided the army wasn't for him, so in June 1974, at the age of 21, he returned home. But his father soon left New York when his hardware store was robbed, leaving his son alone in the city. Berkowitz had dreams of becoming a firefighter, but instead had to settle for low-paid security work. The night shifts provided endless hours for him to ruminate.
Berkowitz already sees himself as an outsider. He's not settled. He feels hurt. He knows he's a loner. He knows he can't relate very well to other people.
So this is when he starts to become quite dangerous.
Feeling increasingly isolated, Berkowitz decided to track down his biological mother, Betty. He found her and sent her a poem on May the 11th, 1975, Mother's Day. Betty was over the moon to hear from her long-lost son, and they arranged to meet.
She's delighted to see him, and they have this wonderful reunion, apparently. And they continue to meet, and they have this kind of loving relationship.
But soon the love for his newfound mother would sour.
He meets his half-sister. This was the child that his mother didn't give away. And he realizes that he was a throwaway child, and there's this other child that's been loved all this time by his mother. And he becomes furious.
It's believed this rejection by his mother as a child was the genesis of Berkowitz's hatred for women. Once again, isolated and alone with his paranoid thoughts, he wrote to his father. "Dad, the world is getting dark now," he said. "The people, they are developing a hatred for me."
So what he's doing in this letter is presenting himself as the victim, saying, "Poor me, I have this horrible life now." And he's essentially saying to his adoptive father, "It's your fault because you left me."
I'm sure at that point he is building yet more fantasies that he's been rejected, not just by the world, but by women.
That November in 1975, Berkowitz spent a month in isolation in his apartment. He nailed blankets over the windows and scrawled dark ramblings on the walls. "In this hole lives the wicked king," he wrote. "Kill for my master," was another.
I think this was attention-seeking behaviour, and he gets very frustrated that nobody comes to check up on him. I think there's a kind of sense of entitlement there, that other people should be looking after me.
On December the 24th, Christmas Eve, a delusional David Berkowitz decided to make his scrawlings about killing a reality. He left his self-imposed exile armed with a hunting knife. He wanted to seek out revenge for the rejection by his birth mother. Now the ex-soldier was on a mission to kill.
He was in the area of Yonkers, and he had a knife with him. And he walked up to a young lady, started stabbing her. She screamed, left, went a couple blocks away, and started stabbing another lady. She screamed, and he left. Only one of those two ladies reported it.
I think the timing is really significant here, because Christmas, it's a family time, and I think it's when Berkowitz is feeling the most resentful towards people who have things that he doesn't. I think the thing that he would have come away with is, I enjoyed that, I liked harming them, but I didn't achieve the outcome that I wanted, and that was to kill them.
That evening, Berkowitz reflected on his failure. In the coming months, he would try a change of tack.
David Berkowitz, to the people who knew him, was this kind of puzzle of many pieces, and many of the pieces didn't fit, so that there were some who saw this happy-go-lucky, slightly shy, helpful young man, and others who saw this angry edge.
Berkowitz developed an angst-ridden obsession with one of his neighbors, retiree Sam Carr.
His neighbour's dog, Harvey, barks during the night, and he finds this really annoying. And he will ruminate about this, he dwells on it.
On May the 13th, things came to a head when Berkowitz threw a petrol bomb into Sam's backyard. Scared for his life, Sam reported it to the police, but they couldn't find the attacker. Meanwhile, Berkowitz continued his reign of terror, setting fires in nearby apartment buildings.
When we look at young people who engage in this kind of behaviour, fire setting is a way of them maintaining control. It's an externalisation. They have these feelings, they want to do something with those feelings, and rather than turning it in on themselves, they turn it outward to start harming other people and other things.
Soon the world would know of David Berkowitz. After his knife attacks failed, Berkowitz decided on a different weapon of attack. He illegally brought a gun that he could use with cold, calculating precision, a Bulldog .44 caliber revolver. On Thursday, July the 29th, Berkowitz was stalking the streets of the Bronx.
David Berkowitz was driving in the street looking for his next victims.
18-year-old Donna Loria and her 19-year-old friend Jody had been out playing backgammon at a local bar. They'd returned home and were sitting in their car outside Donna's apartment.
They were chatting to one another when all of a sudden, out of the blue, out of nowhere, the passenger side window explodes. And what's happened is that Berkowitz has gone into a firing position, extended the gun with both hands, and fired 5 times into the car.
Donna was fatally wounded in the neck. Her friend Jody was shot in the thigh. Berkowitz fled as Donna's father, having heard gunfire, rushed down from his apartment to the scene. But nothing could be done to save his daughter.
It turned out that the bullet recovered was a .44 bullet from a Bulldog revolver, which was a rare gun. David Berkowitz said that when he left that scene, he sang a song on the way home because the demons had told him to go out and kill, and he killed.
I think think he quite enjoyed that high, that kind of elevated sense of status of taking someone else's life. He's targeting young people who are happy, people who have their whole lives ahead of them, and he feels, actually, I'm entitled to take that away from them because they don't deserve it, and I do.
The police were puzzled at the motive for the shooting and wrote it off as a botched mafia hit. Berkowitz was disappointed that his first killing didn't create headlines in the press, as he later revealed to the police.
After that first murder, in August of 1976, David Berkowitz was at the Westchester County Mall, and he said nobody recognizes him, as if somebody should know who he is. And he says, I wish I had a machine gun.
In an attempt to gain the recognition he so desperately craved, 3 months later, on the 23rd of October 1976, David Berkowitz struck again. This time he targeted a couple on a date in the nearby borough of Queens, in a so-called Lover's Lane.
An individual by the name of Carl De Niro is parked with his girlfriend, sitting in a car at night, and he's sitting in the passenger side, and Carl De Niro has long hair. It's believed that Berkowitz thought De Niro was a girl.
Berkowitz shot into their car, hitting 20-year-old Carl in the head. To Berkowitz's disappointment, Carl survived, and his date Rosemary was unscathed. A month later, he stalked the streets of Queens looking for more victims. In the early hours of the 27th of November, he found 16-year-old Donna DeMasi and 18-year-old Joanne Lamino sitting on a step.
He then walks over, says a few words, and shoots, and flees the scene. Miss DeMasi survived. Miss Lamino is confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Devastating injury.
Berkowitz had once more failed in his quest to kill again. But his time would come in the new year of 1977, on January the 30th. 26-year-old Christine Freund was on a date with her fiancé, 30-year-old John Deal, when Berkowitz spotted them.
He parks not far from where that couple was, and he observes a Christine Freund sitting in a car with her fiancé. Runs up to the car and shoots Christine Freund, killing her instantly.
Christine was shot in the temple and in the neck. Her fiancé John ran to get help, but Christine was later pronounced dead in the hospital. The young lovers were about to tell their parents about their engagement before Berkowitz took Christine's life in his second fatal shooting.
None of the Berkowitz shootings were seen as particularly unusual until the murder of Christine Freund. And here, for the first time, police said that they saw some connection between this shooting and previous shootings. Now we begin to see that there might be something more than a series of isolated shootings.
3 days after Christine's killing, a 16-man homicide task force was established by the New York City Police Department. A pattern was emerging of a killer who had a hatred for women. Just like his stabbing victims, Berkowitz was targeting females with long, dark hair.
They were in lovers' lanes, around discos. Berkowitz clearly had problems with women. He said later that he saw his mother sitting in those cars when he shot the girls.
A pattern was also emerging of the killer's fascination for a particular location, lovers' lanes. It is believed that Berkowitz was a virgin.
There could be a voyeuristic element. I've never had sex myself, and I bet they're about to have sex, and I want to see what it's like. I do believe that there may have been an element of trying to destroy his mother. What is clear is he's completely off the wall.
Berkowitz had now shot 6 people and killed 2 women. Barely a month later, on March the 8th, he was back out on the streets of Forest Hills, Queens. The brazen killer was now gaining in confidence. This time he chose early evening and a lone victim.
College student Virginia Vascarichian is walking down the street. The time of 7:30 is much earlier than the previous incidents. She's walking down the street and the assailant is approaching her. She sees him pull out a gun, and she puts her books in front of her head, and he shoots through the books and kills her instantly.
Once again, Berkowitz fled the scene, even saying hello to a passerby.
So when we look at Virginia, his third murder victim, he's starting to increase in confidence now. He feels quite invincible. He feels kind of elated. He attacks her in the middle of the street because he feels untouchable. He feels like he can get away with it.
What was it that made him change his modus operandi? I think he just felt like experimenting. He's been in this state of collapse, if you like, this fugue of horror, this terror reign for 15 months.
A single bullet from Berkowitz's .44 Bulldog revolver had penetrated 20-year-old Virginia's skull. When pathologists removed it, it confirmed the police's suspicions that they had a serial killer on their hands.
They did a forensic comparison and found that the same gun used on the Freud shooting was used in the Vascarichian shooting.
2 days after Virginia's murder, New York City Police Commissioner Michael Codd held a press conference. He told reporters that they were on the hunt for a serial shooter.
He announced that the bullet was a .44 caliber bullet, that it was fired from a Charter Arms Bulldog revolver, and that it was linked to at least 3 killings. And for the first time now, we see officially that all these shootings are linked.
For serial killer David Berkowitz, his murders now made the headlines that he so craved.
For the first time, we had a name for the killer, the .44 caliber killer. It was a perfect tabloid headline, and any time there was a shooting, young people involved, reporters went scrambling to find the story. Now, the city is in Berkowitz's palm. He's got the city now where he wants it. He's accomplished what he wants to do, which is to have the city in total fear of him.
Even though he'd taken 3 innocent lives, the killing wouldn't stop. Berkowitz enjoyed the drama that was unfolding. He watched the news and took clippings about his killings as trophies. New York's #1 news story was now spreading fear in the city.
People read the story. Girls begin to worry. Parents wouldn't let their kids out for late-night dates. People began to see a pattern in these shootings, that the victims were pretty young women with long brown hair. Girls began cutting their hair, dyeing it blonde. There was an overall growing sense of fear.
The NYPD's Omega Task Force, now investigating the shootings, was boosted from 16 to a 30-strong team. But Berkowitz wanted to make an even bigger splash across the newspapers. Barely a month after being christened the .44 caliber killer, he would strike again. But this time his hunting ground was the Bronx.
On April 17, 1977, Valentina Suriani and Alexander Esau at 3 a.m. in the morning were parked in a car when the assailant came up to the car, put his hand on the hood, and fired through the front windows.
18-year-old aspiring actress Valentina died within a minute of the attack. Her 20-year-old boyfriend Alexander died 2 hours later in the hospital. Berkowitz had successfully fled once again, but this time he had a surprise in store.
They found a letter that had been left by the killer for Detective Joseph Borelli, the Omega Task Force leader. And the killer complained that he had been referred to as a woman hater, and he was angry about that.
Despite this, Berkowitz stated in the letter, "I love to hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game. Tasty meat, the women of Queens are prettiest of all." For the police's psychological profilers, they were convinced this message revealed his motive was a hatred of women.
What was interesting about the note, the spelling was good, but he always spelled the word women incorrectly. He would spell it W-E-M-O-N. If you changed the W to a D, you would have demon. Now, whether in his mind women were demons or what have you, but he was threatening to commit more murders as a result of that note.
He's wanting recognition, he's wanting attention now for the things that he's done. But he's also saying things like, I don't belong on this earth. In other words, I am better than everybody else.
Chillingly, one of Berkowitz's last lines of his letter to Captain Borelli warned, I don't want to kill any more. No, sir, no more. But I must honour thy father. Most disturbing of all was the name he signed off as, Son of Sam.
It was the first time we had any mention of this name, the Son of Sam. And immediately his moniker changed from the .44 caliber killer to the Son of Sam. And no one at that time really had any clue of exactly what that meant.
He wants that brand, that identity. You can see that this is someone who thinks very highly of himself, and he's quite disappointed, I think, that he hasn't had that recognition that he feels he deserves.
What the press and public didn't know is that the Sam Berkowitz was referring to was in fact his neighbour Sam Carr. Berkowitz was also sending this same neighbour threatening anonymous letters about his Labrador, Harvey.
He's disintegrating in front of his own eyes, let alone anybody else's. He's living alone. He's obsessed by the fact that his neighbour's dog is barking all night.
Berkowitz's torment came to a head on the foggy morning of April the 27th, when the ex-soldier shot Harvey the dog from his apartment block with a .22 caliber rifle.
This is a man falling apart, literally. He's convinced that he's hearing voices, that his neighbour Sam is influencing him, and that the dog is sending him messages that he must commit demonic acts.
Luckily, Harvey was not seriously injured, and with no clear view of the shooter, the police had little to go on. A month later, at the end of May, Berkowitz crafted another taunting, cryptic letter, this time to Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin.
Jimmy Breslin was the top columnist in New York. So, if Berkowitz wanted publicity and wanted to find someone who could take his story to the people and whose story would then be read, Jimmy Breslin was the man to do it.
In the letter, Berkowitz told Jimmy, Sam's a thirsty lad, and he won't let me stop killing until he gets his fill of blood.
The city room was flooded with police officers. And then, for the first time, the Daily News wasn't simply reporting the story, the Daily News was the story.
Son of Sam's letter confessed to the murder of his first victim, 18-year-old Donna Lauria, and he asked Jimmy Breslin to celebrate the anniversary of her killing.
This prompted outrage among everyone. So we had in that story not only the infuriating letter that Berkowitz had written saying that Donna Lauria was a wonderful girl and she should be memorialized, but also her family's reaction to that, their anger, their deep, deep sadness and grief, all came out in a single column by Breslin.
A lot of people have interpreted this as some kind of affection, some kind of love. But what it is, it's about ownership and possession and control. And for many serial killers, the first victim is a very significant one, the first time that they start to feel like they're in control. So that's why there's an importance attached to her. There was no feelings of affection whatsoever.
As newspapers battle for the latest scoops on Son of Sam, Jimmy Breslin's letter was published in the weekend edition of the Daily News to achieve maximum impact.
The letter wasn't published until Sunday, when the largest circulation would be available. The public release of Berkowitz's letter to Jimmy Breslin did create a frenzy and a fear in the public and among journalists.
The media spotlight on the case resulted in 250 calls a day to the police hotline, with people reporting suspicions about neighbors, boyfriends, even their husbands. With the pressure of having to catch a serial shooter on the loose before he struck again, the NYPD even planted decoy female mannequins in parked cars to try and entrap the killer.
I think the biggest challenge was to get him as quickly as possible, because you knew this wasn't going to be the last time he was going to kill. That was the pressure that was put upon, I think, all the investigators at the time, and the fact that you knew that it wasn't going to end.
Sure enough, on June the 26th, Berkowitz struck again, shooting another man and woman in Queens. Luckily, they escaped with minor injuries. But his next attack just over a month later in Brooklyn would whip up a wave of hysteria that New York City had never seen. On the 31st of July, 20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz went out on a date with 20-year-old Robert Violante.
That was their first date, and both Robert Violante's parents and Stacy Moskowitz's parents were concerned. And Stacy and Robert both said to their respective mothers, he doesn't go after blondes. He doesn't go after blondes. They felt that was going to be the case that night.
After dinner and a movie, Stacy and Robert headed to a park in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Berkowitz was also cruising in the area looking for his next victim. He pulled up close by.
Berkowitz fired 4 times into the car and fled back into the park. Stacy remained in the car, seriously injured. Robert Violante blasted the horn, got out, staggered, and was leaning against the light pole.
Robert was shot twice in the face. His left eye was shattered, and he was left permanently blind. Stacy was pronounced dead in the hospital 38 hours later.
When he struck in Brooklyn, I mean, there was hysteria within the city. The New York Post had on the front page, "No one is safe from the son of Sam." The number of calls that came in to the hotline was overwhelming. People now felt he could go any place, and he did.
So that people who thought that they were safe before no longer had that assurance. Suddenly he was all over the city, and his victims were changing. So clearly that created a whole new element of fear that hadn't existed before.
It is the most horrifying crime. People genuinely were afraid to go out. You cannot overestimate or exaggerate just how much that fear gripped the city.
He'd taken 6 young lives within a year, and the serial killer was the talk of the town. Berkowitz was relishing in his rising notoriety. The New York Police Department now had 225 patrolmen and 75 detectives working full-time on the case. Former Detective Sergeant Bill Gardella was brought in to investigate the latest killing of 20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz next to a park in Bensonhurst.
I was awakened in the middle of the night. They said, "Sarge, it looks like we got a shooting in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Maybe the son of Sam." I jumped out of bed, got dressed, and drove over to the scene at Bay 17th Street and the park. We were then given other detective units in Brooklyn to assist in questioning as many people as we could. No one was safe. He could strike anywhere.
Whilst Detective Gardella and his colleagues were hot on the trail for any leads, New York's rival newspapers were also on the hunt for a scoop on the latest killing. Former news reporter Brian Cates was sent to the home of son of Sam's 6th victim, Stacy, where he met her mother, Nesha.
Nesha Moskowitz was stunned, really, by her daughter's death. We talk about what a beautiful girl her daughter had been. How could this have happened to us? And then she'd fall silent. She'd look down at the floor and then look at the pictures she had of Stacy and start to cry. Sitting through this experience of grief was very difficult as a reporter. You have this great sympathy for this family, for this horrible death.
Meanwhile, Detective Bill Gardella and his team were on the hunt for witnesses who may have seen her killer. 3 days after her murder, on the 3rd of August, they had a breakthrough. They found a 49-year-old woman who'd been out walking her dog just minutes before Stacy's shooting.
She observed a male coming in her direction, and he was carrying something in his hand. I don't know what it is, but I was upset. I was afraid. I pulled my dog, went back, made a U-turn, went back into my apartment, and a few minutes later, I heard shots. I heard shots.
This new witness had seen a car being booked by a patrolling police officer for parking next to a fire hydrant. When detectives checked, there was no record of any tickets being issued.
She insisted I saw a summons being given out. We checked a second time. No summonses. We went back. She insisted so much, we'll give it one more try.
Fellow NYPD detective James Justice was sent to meet the patrolling officer on duty that evening to see if he knew anything about this elusive parking ticket.
When I was able to speak to the uniformed officer, he informed me what had happened, that he had left it in his locker.
And sure enough, there were 4 summonses given out. One of them to a David Berkowitz that lived in Yonkers. That third attempt picked up that summons. If we didn't make 3 efforts, we would have not got Berkowitz then.
Finally, David Berkowitz came onto the police radar. When Detective James Justice called Yonkers PD, another stroke of luck meant the dispatcher who picked up the phone was the daughter of Berkowitz's nemesis and neighbor, Sam Carr.
Weed Carr happened to live with her dad in an apartment house right behind the apartment house that David Berkowitz lived in. And she related to me various stories about Berkowitz and their association with him, and the problems that they had with him, and the fact that Berkowitz shot their black lab.
He was also told about another neighbor who'd been receiving strange letters and had recently found a fire burning outside his door. The neighbor suspected Berkowitz was to blame.
The strangeness of what this guy was doing, and the fact that he wasn't related to Sam Carr, but the name Sam was there, and I put this all in a report. My inspector asked me how everything went, and I said to him, I got a gut feeling we have the guy.
2 detectives from the Son of Sam investigation were sent to Berkowitz's apartment on Pine Street, Yonkers. They found his Ford Galaxy parked outside and cautiously peered in through the window to see if there was any incriminating evidence.
They look into the car, and on the floor of the rear of the car, there is an Army duffel bag, and protruding from the duffel bag, we thought was a submachine gun, was a semi-automatic rifle.
The detectives found that Berkowitz's car was unlocked.
They enter the vehicle, and they come up with a letter addressed to the Suffolk County Police Chief. The letter stated, "You can't stop me, I'm coming out." And this was the straw that broke the camel's back, to split the case wide open. This was the Son of Sam.
Detective Sergeant Bill Gardella was called with news of this exciting find. With 5 of his NYPD team, they rushed over to stake out Berkowitz's apartment block. 4 hours later at 10 p.m., their patience finally paid off when the killer approached his car.
I took my gun out, ran down the sidewalk as fast as I could to confront Berkowitz before he had an opportunity to go for his gun. And I screamed at him, "Police, don't you go for a gun." And he slowly turns his head like this and smiles. So, "Well," he said, "you got me. What took you so long?"
I think he knew that this was coming. He knew he wouldn't be able to get away with it forever. But this is someone who is very used to being in control. And he remains in control. He smiles, which I think the police find quite unnerving.
Once handcuffed and arrested, on the journey in the police car from Yonkers back to New York City Police Headquarters, serial killer David Berkowitz was ready to indulge in his newfound fame.
Berkowitz says, "Hey guys, I guess the press is waiting for me at New York City Police Headquarters with their cameras. Can you do me a favor? Can you comb my hair?" He's going to serve a life sentence in jail. He's concerned about his hair. And then when we pulled up to police headquarters, there were a few people on the street screaming. And I told the captain that was with me, "Cap," I says, "I want to go in the garage." He said, "Bill, no, let's get our pictures taken." The mayor was at police headquarters. That was the end. That was it.
New York Daily News reporter Brian Cates was on a night shift when he got the news that Son of Sam had finally been arrested.
Everybody was abuzz with this. There was jubilation in the city. And in fact, there were parties at bars and clubs celebrating the fact that he'd been captured. There was a collective sigh of relief that the police had got their man and that hopefully the killings were over.
There's no question that Berkowitz would have gone on. He would have killed again and again and again until he was eventually stopped. The classic serial killer. They don't stop until they're caught.
The police had captured Berkowitz just in the nick of time. Using the semi-automatic rifle found in his car that weekend, the son of Sam was planning a mass shooting. Detective Sergeant Bill Gardella was one of the first police officers to search his apartment.
Anytime I speak about his apartment, my body starts to chill because it's something that I had never seen before. He had photographs of all the girls he killed on the floor. He had cut them out of the newspapers, and he had holes in the wall. Voices used to come out of those holes to tell him to go out and kill. And he used to try to stop the voices by hitting the wall. And then he would write a note next to each of the holes. One of the notes I pretty much committed to memory. It said, "Hi, my name is Mr. Williams. I live in this hole. I'm raising little children to be killers. Can't wait until they grow up." It just was a sight I never forgot. And it's the only thing in my lifetime that, if I talk about it, I get the chills.
Strange satanic symbols were also scrawled across Berkowitz's walls. During the police interviews that followed, he confessed to carrying out the shootings and claimed that the devil was talking to him through neighbor Sam Carr's dog, instructing him to kill. When it came to his trial, psychiatrists were split on whether he was mentally fit to stand.
These claims that he was hearing voices, that his neighbour's dog Harvey was essentially talking to him and this was the voice of a demon. I think this is nonsense, to be honest. I think this is just part of his performance of trying to appear to be insane, because he's been caught now and he wants to secure the best possible outcome for himself. And that outcome will always be better if you claim you're not responsible for what you've done.
In the end, Berkowitz was deemed fit to stand trial. As it was ruled, he understood the charges against him. But after consulting a priest, son of Sam had an unexpected surprise up his sleeve.
His lawyers wanted him to mount an insanity defense and go to trial. Berkowitz determined that he would not do that, that he would plead guilty, which he did, meaning that there would be no trial.
On the 12th of June 1978, 25-year-old David Berkowitz was finally sentenced to a total of 365 years in prison.
This is someone who's never, ever going to be released from prison. And I think he would have gone on to kill more people had he not been arrested. This man is incredibly dangerous.
But the name Son of Sam is indelibly marked on the city he terrorized.
That fear was fueled, of course, by the media. At the time of his last murders, the entire world reported on the capture of David Berkowitz. That's how far his reach extended.
He didn't do it for money. He didn't do it for sex. He did it because he felt like it, because he wanted to. And that makes him a very evil man indeed.
Berkowitz mercilessly gunned down and killed 6 young people who were merely out enjoying themselves. He brutally wounded 7 others, leaving them with life-changing injuries. He terrorized a city that's still living with trauma of his crimes. That's what makes David Berkowitz one of the world's most evil killers. The 5th of July, 1998, Manhattan, New York. 82-year-old Irene Silverman vanished, never to be seen again. She'd been brutally attacked in her home, tasered, then strangled, in a bid to fraudulently seize the title to her multi-million-dollar property.
It was an act of the most grotesque malevolence. They dumped the body in a dumpster. It is such a brutal act.
The 2 killers were a mother and son duo, 23-year-old Kenny Kimes and his 63-year-old mother, Sante. She was a con artist who would stop at nothing to keep her crimes under wraps.
Most of her victims were obstacles, as far as she was concerned, that needed to be got out of the way. There was something innately evil about her.
Over the course of 2 years, Sante Kimes coerced her son Kenny into committing 3 murders.
She transformed him into a really evil person like her. She was like a black widow, and he became that way too.
Even their own family were wary of them.
Mom has always been dangerous, but when Kenny became her partner, she became really dangerous.
Driven by greed, they duped innocent victims out of thousands of dollars and brutally killed 3 people to maximize their ill-gotten gains, making Sante and Kenny Kimes 2 of the world's most evil killers. Wealthy New York socialite Irene Silverman vanished on the 5th of July, 1998. Her killers, Sante and Kenny Kimes, had already been linked to crimes in 5 separate US states, following a trail of fraud and suspected murder. Former NYPD detective Tom Hovergem was investigating Irene's murder.
They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were smarter than everyone else, especially Sante. Kenny physically did it, but she gave the orders. Make no mistake about it.
By sheer coincidence, on the same day as the murder of multi-million-dollar heiress Irene, the police already had a sting in place at a local hotel to capture the Kimes for other crimes they'd been linked to.
They later found out that they were being arrested for the bad check on the car, and that was a big relief to them. But little did they know we were also investigating them for Irene Silverman's murder.
The Elizabeth Taylor look-alike and master of disguise Sante Kimes fooled victims across the US during her outlandish 43-year crime spree. She used her powers of persuasion to gatecrash parties with the rich and famous, including US Vice President Gerald Ford.
She had at least 22 aliases, all kinds of different social security numbers, all kinds of different passports. She was a million faces. She lies so relentlessly to everyone. It's a complete construct.
She knew how to make you feel like the most important person in the world. It was fun. Everyone loved her. She was the life of the party. As evil as she is, my mom was a walking contradiction. Her nature's evil. And the problem was that she was good at it.
She was a coercively controlling manipulator. Some people, in going after that sense of power and that sense of control, will stop at nothing to achieve it.
Say hi, give a smile. Jeez.
Sante Kimes' story begins on July the 24th, 1934, in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. She was born Sandra Singers and had a brother and 2 sisters. It was the time of a global economic downturn, the Great Depression. Families like Sante's, who lived off the land, were struggling to feed themselves due to an intense drought in America's South.
There's a lot of poverty in society at this point in time, and this is something that she will always be very conscious of throughout her life. She came from quite a poor background. Her father was East Indian, her mother was a Dutch migrant, and it's said that she experienced quite a lot of racism. But it's very difficult to know what's true and what's fabrication, because this woman was good at creating histories that didn't exist.
Somehow they ended up in Los Angeles. And her father, my grandfather, was kind of a con artist too, from what we can think of now. He left my grandmother on the streets in LA, basically homeless, as far as we know. It was tough.
Shaunti used to steal from food stores. She claimed that was part of her survival strategy. She was very conscious early on of the huge disparity in wealth between people like her and people like the Hollywood set. And so she became very conscious early on of the need to achieve some kind of material wealth, and of course she became obsessed by it.
Desperate to escape her poverty, at the age of 13, Sante, or Sandra as she was baptized, was given a lucky break. An LA theatre owner took a shine to her and arranged for their childless sister to adopt Sante.
The story goes that actually her mother and her sister were quite happy to wave her off because she was quite a handful. And I think with this new mum and dad, she would have been doted on. So I think any kind of narcissism that was developing in her would have been exacerbated even more.
The young Sante was now living in Nevada and moving her way up in the world. Her adopted father had a well-paid job in the army, and she was focused on getting good grades at school to climb up the social ladder.
She was terrified of being poor. She was scarred by her childhood.
She's been described as quite pushy, quite overbearing, and it's said that she had only one female friend during her school days. And this female friend was somebody who really looked up to her. And this is quite significant for me, because when you have a case of somebody who is a narcissist, you often have a codependent.
With her friend Ruth, she decided to move back to California, where they enrolled in journalism at college. It was in Santa Barbara where Sante first tried her hand at fraud, using the name of Ruth's future father-in-law, Bruce.
Bruce started getting all these bills, and what Mom had done is gone down to the local department store and charged thousands of dollars to his name for makeup, perfumes, clothes, and stuff like that. And that was the first thing that I know of that made Mom start to show what she really was.
On the 9th of May 1956, at the age of 21, Sante decided to marry her boyfriend Lee. But when he got a job as a lowly paid teacher, Sante filed for divorce after barely a year of marriage.
She was physically quite attractive, but she was very much a parasite. She would hook on to particular men, get what she wanted, and then she would just abandon them.
Sante now focused on finding the next man in her life who could take her up in the world. Just a few months after her first marriage ended, on the 9th of November 1957, she married an old high school sweetheart, Ed Walker.
My dad was kind of like that puppy. My dad was completely enamored with her. He was his entire life.
She wanted him to, quote, better himself so that she could be better too. She spent extravagantly. I mean, she would spend $13,000 one Christmas on Christmas presents. He couldn't afford that. There was no way that in the end, it wouldn't drive Ed to distraction.
Sante wanted to be more than an average suburban housewife. She wanted to exude wealth. So she began to reinvent herself, ditching her birth name Sandra to make herself sound more exotic.
Mom's name changed several times throughout her life. She started off as Sandy, and then she decided she wanted to be kind of French. Somewhere along the lines it turned into Santee, and then she went to Sante.
In 1962, Sante found herself in a whole new role when their son Kent was born and she became mum. But even this didn't deter her from her grifting ways.
Just at the time, she treated me like a king or prince and made me feel like the most important person in the world, you know, and her love was fierce. You know, so when you saw the bad stuff, well, I don't know, maybe other families like that too. I didn't know, it's all that I knew.
Not long after Kent's arrival, the cracks in the marriage were beginning to show, and Sante had a string of affairs. With her spending sky high, she resorted to new ways of funding her lifestyle, making fraudulent insurance claims through arson.
One of my earliest memories, we pull up the driveway and there's fire engines all over the place and stuff. The house had burned to the ground. And I think that was the third or fourth fire. It pretty much destroyed my father. I mean, everything that he would do was successful, but she found a way to destroy it.
The local police would later nickname Sante the Dragon Lady because of the number of mysterious fires that were attached to her name. She'd moved with husband Ed and their young son Kent from Sacramento to escape the suspicions about the number of homes she'd burnt down.
What a wonderful scheme. You just keep on setting fire to places, you claim the insurance, you make more money. She knew exactly what she was doing and why she was doing it.
Because of Sante's obsessive need for material wealth, she also continued with another compulsive criminal pastime.
Mom always stole. I mean, there was always shoplifting involved. I mean, I was her little helper. I didn't know, I was a kid. I'm not trying to make an excuse, but it's all I knew. That's Mom.
In 1966, she was arrested 3 times in a 5-day period. She had no concept of right or wrong.
The police raided the family home and found credit cards that Sante had taken out under a number of fake aliases. She faced 17 charges of grand theft, but thanks to legal help provided by one of her boyfriends, she walked away with nothing more than a petty fine. Meanwhile, the affairs continued. For husband Ed, it was the final straw.
I remember they were in this huge argument, and Mom was going crazy. And she actually threw a knife at him, and I saw it stick in his arm. There's times when he walked in the house and saw her in someone else's embraces. My parents divorced. She destroyed my father. He was a broken man, and he never fully recovered.
With nobody to rein her in, Sante's escapades escalated. On the odd occasion that she did get caught out, she would do whatever necessary to get out of her latest fix, even exploiting her own 7-year-old son.
Not too long after Mom and Dad split, I was sitting on the hood of the car, waiting for Mom. Mom came running out of the dress shop, and this lady was chasing her. And she's saying, "Get in the car, get in the car." The lady came up and actually grabbed Mom's arm. "You're shoplifting. We saw you put that dress in that bag." So what Mom did is she stood up for a minute, and she didn't say a word, and she clenched her fist and roundhouses me and gets me right in the lip, split my lip wide open. I still have the scar. Cops got there, and Mom starts screaming, "This bitch hit my son, this bitch hit my son." And long story short, the cops ended up arresting her for hitting me.
Now officially free and single, Sante was determined to climb the social ladder. To do this, she knew she had to marry into wealth.
We call those years Mom's search for a millionaire. I think we were broke. I mean, we were living in a nice house and stuff, but the refrigerator was bare. I mean, I grew up on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for a while. She'd give me lectures for hours and hours. Marry for money, you don't want to be broke. You know, that was her mantra.
Sante would use her looks to find herself her millionaire man.
My mother had a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Taylor, and she played it to the hilt. She was always made up, big black wig and stuff like that. Men were attracted to her, and she was the type of woman that she walked into a room, she got everyone's attention. Everyone's.
Before long, she set her sights on 52-year-old Ken Kimes, a multi-million-dollar property developer who'd struck it rich by building a chain of motels across the US. He was 16 years Sante's senior.
Ken was worth, our estimates at the time, about $22 million. And this was in 1969, 1970. Okay, so that's, you know, today's money, it's a lot more.
She's very manipulative in how she goes about landing him. So she finds out that his favourite colour is white, so she wears white all the time. She finds out that he likes gardenias, the flower, so she has a perfume that smells of those flowers. So she's doing everything that she can to appear very alluring to this man.
Sante engineered a meeting with her newfound millionaire.
Ken was rather flattered. A friend, I think, warned him at one point, she's not up to much, you know, she's got a very dodgy record, but Ken didn't mind. She became more and more controlling, and Ken Kimes fell into her web.
People regarded him as goofy. He was a man who, in spite of his relative success, was obviously very unsure of himself. What the Kimes family didn't have that they really wanted was high-level status.
Sante preyed on these insecurities. She cemented her role as his lover by creating something that would boost his ego. She created a fictitious role for him as an ambassador. Sante grifted herself and Ken Kimes into a reception at the US Presidential Guest House in Washington, D.C.
They're photographed with Vice President Gerald Ford, and then they go on to crash another 3 parties at other embassies. Only Sante, only she could have got away with it.
In spite of her many talents, Ken seemed unwilling to commit to marriage. Now Sante was concerned about how she would get hold of his millions. She had competition, as Ken had children from his previous marriage. She disdainfully referred to them as the creeps.
They see her as a predatory gold digger, so it's going to be quite difficult for her to actually get access to Ken's money. What's the best way to get to somebody's money? Well, it's to create an heir.
On the 24th of March 1975, Ken and Sante welcomed a son, Kenneth Kareem Kimes, known as Kenny, into the world. As he grew up, Sante kept him isolated. She used home tutors so that he didn't even have to go to school.
Kenny Kimes' early years would have been when he was completely enmeshed with his mother. Kenny almost becomes an extension of her, and there's very much a codependent relationship that emerges. So his existence, his identity, is very much premised on hers.
Kenny was the golden child. I loved him. I mean, he was a great little brother. We played and stuff. He was a great kid.
The first big change in the happy young Kenny was at the age of 10, when he witnessed his parents get arrested. On the 12th of July 1985, the FBI raided their Las Vegas home. Sante had been trafficking young Mexican girls across the border and imprisoning them in her home as slaves. Several had escaped, accusing Sante of extreme physical abuse. One of her so-called maids claimed she was attacked with an iron.
It became obvious that something much more dangerous and criminal was going on behind the facade of respectability and money. Rather sad, Ken Kimes, who was not young, gets charged with 15 counts of slavery. He did a deal with the prosecutors. He got a 3-year suspended prison sentence. He had to enter an alcoholic treatment program because it was perfectly obvious to the FBI that he was drunk a great deal of the time.
Sante, however, was sentenced to 5 years in jail. Free from his mother's influence for the first time, young Kenny started to experience a normal life. He was allowed to go to school and make friends with his peers. But by December 1989, after serving 3 years of her sentence, Sante was back home. She was quick to rein Kenny in.
The coercively controlling behaviour becomes much more focused. She gets him to leave school. If anything, it's even worse than it was before.
And it's at that point where the Kenny that grew up with me, that I loved and was fun to be with, rather the potential to being a good person, started to shift. And his disappointment and his anger and his rage was relentless. He was out of control.
At the age of 16, Kenny ran away from home. Sante sent his older brother, Kent, to stop him.
Got Kenny back home. And his attitude did not get better. He was still in the rages and stuff. But he did stay. You know, I thought I was doing the right thing, but, you know, I'll wonder every day if I let him go, what would things be like today?
Sante and Ken had homes in various US states, as well as Nassau in the Bahamas. The illusion was a life of luxury and class, but the reality was that everything had become very stressful for 77-year-old Ken due to Sante's compulsive grifting. Suddenly, on the 28th of March 1994, he died from an aneurysm.
Now, Sante has another problem. She doesn't want the creeps from his first marriage to get any of the money that there is in the estate. And so nobody's told that he's died. She doesn't allow there to be a full autopsy. It's a very quick cremation.
Ken had died March 28th. Kenny did not find out about it until June. And what had happened is Mom convinced me not to tell Kenny, not to tell anyone knew. I'm so ashamed of myself that she was able to manipulate me to do that.
Shante kept Ken financially alive for some time after his death by using his credit cards and trying to access his accounts.
But soon questions were being asked by an executive at Ken's offshore bank, Gulf Union. 55-year-old Syed Bilal Ahmed was concerned about the flurry of faxes requesting money transfers by his client Ken Kimes. Syed suspected they were fake.
He turned up in the Bahamas to investigate irregularities in Ken Sr.'s accounts. And of course, Shante immediately recognized that he was an obstacle that needed to be removed.
On the 4th of September 1996, Sante and her son Kenny wined and dined the bank investigator at their favorite Nassau restaurant.
They eventually invited him back for coffee to the house, and that's when they fed the date rape drug into his drink, got him into a dozy state, and drowned him in the bath. The two of them took it in turns to hold him under the water. It's believed Kenny took the body and dropped it in the sea. However, the body has never been found.
As far as the police are concerned, he's simply a missing person. Yes, of course, the last two people to see Saeed alive are Sante and Kenny, but there is no blood evidence. There is nothing.
21-year-old Kenny was now fully committed to Sante's criminal ways, helping her carry out the ultimate of crimes, murder. They fled from the Bahamas to the Sunshine State of Florida.
Apparently they got a motorhome and they went zigzagged across the states, scamming as a matter of course as well.
The mother and son team embarked on a Bonnie and Clyde-style shoplifting crime spree until the 19th of May 1997, when Sante was apprehended in a department store. Kenny punched a policeman to let his mother escape, and he was arrested for the first time. The 22-year-old called his brother Kent.
I'm in jail, and I was relieved. I was thankful for it. Maybe this is one thing that got him to stay straight, you know, get him back on the right track, let him know there's consequences. That didn't happen.
In the eyes of US prosecutors, Kenny was a first-time offender and as such was treated leniently.
This teaches Kenny a very important lesson, that actually you can break the law and you can get away with it, and there will be no consequences for you. So this is something that is incredibly important.
By now, Sante's late husband's millions had been depleted, and what remained was mostly tied up in property. So, Sante and Kenny turned up flat broke at the door of Sante's eldest son, Kent.
It started to be more Mom and Kenny against me. They were becoming a team that just didn't feel right. But one time I walked into my office and Mom and Kenny are sitting there behind my desk, going through my drawers. I said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Mom and Kenny were getting tighter and tighter, and I was becoming the outsider.
The criminal twosome eventually left, but not before they'd identified their next scam. Back in 1992, Sante and husband Ken had transferred the deeds of their Las Vegas home to a family friend, David Kasdan, to avoid it being seized in a legal dispute.
David Kasdan was a 63-year-old New Yorker who had helped them out of a jam. He pretended to own it. At the same time, they got him to sign a quitclaim so that if ever they wanted it back again, they could get it back at once.
In January 1998, Sante used the property as collateral to borrow $280,000 in David's name. He opened up his mail to discover he had a new mortgage.
And then David found out that the house had burned down. The insurance companies were not going to cover it because they knew it was arson.
David reported the fraud to the bank and revealed Sante Kimes was behind it.
Well, Shantae's reaction to the David problem was the usual one, which was to remove the obstacle. Kenny, of course, knew immediately that that would be his job.
On the 13th of March, Kenny and an accomplice, a drifter called Sean, drove to LA and paid a visit to David's home in Granada Hills. Sean waited outside whilst Kenny knocked on his door.
David welcomed him into his house and said, "Would you like a coffee?" and went off to make coffee, at which point Kenny took a revolver, put it at the back of David's neck and fired. He was dead before he hit the floor.
Kenny returned to the accomplice, and together they loaded him into the back of David's own green Jaguar. They dumped David's body in a dumpster in an alley. It wasn't very long before he was discovered. Among the prime suspects in his murder were Sante and Kenny.
I mean, one of the really strange things about the David Kasdan murder is the absolute detachment that Kenny showed in actually doing the deed, because this person was not someone unknown to him, he was someone very well known to him. But what happened next was even more astonishing.
He sends flowers to his mother. It's almost as if this is celebratory. This is an act of approval seeking. It's like, hey, Mum, look what I did for you. And this really reinforces how strong that codependency was between this narcissist and her number two.
Instead of keeping a low profile, Sante was back to her old tricks. 2 weeks prior to David's murder, she'd purchased a car with a forged check. The dealership had now realized they'd been duped and filed charges. Warrants were issued for Sante and Kenny's arrests. Now they were on the run for 2 murders and fraud. They fled 2,800 miles in the stolen car to the East Coast. In the relative anonymity of the big city, New York, the partners in crime conjured up their next money-making scam.
Sante had been researching nice, comfortable apartments in New York. And she'd come across an 82-year-old widow called Irene Silverman, who had a house on East 65th Street in Manhattan, which she'd converted into really very comfortable suites.
This was a lady who was worth a lot of money. Property on the Upper East Side in the Central Park area is very, very expensive, in the tens of millions of dollars. And Sante wanted a piece of this.
Sante concocted another fake alias, Manny Guerin, who was looking for an apartment. This time, her criminal protege, her 23-year-old son Kenny, would play the lead role.
Now, normally, Irene likes very good references, but Kenny plays the classic con. I'll give you the $6,000 now. The implication being, if you don't ask too many questions. It takes less than 24 hours for him to place a bug in her apartment so that he and his mother can listen in to her telephone conversations. They want, by one hook or crook, to get her to sign over the mansion to them.
But from the outset, Irene seemed dubious about her new resident.
Irene Silverman was an incredibly smart woman. She noticed that he was able to evade the security cameras around the building. He kind of crept around, and she knew that he stood behind his door looking out through the peephole because she could see his feet underneath the door. She told people that she didn't like this guy.
After managing to purchase a copy of the deeds to the Manhattan mansion, Sante used her skills as a forger to fake Irene's signature on a deeds transfer.
The con began to take on full force. Sante dresses up as Irene to convince the clerk to notarize the document. It's a truly horrifying story.
The property was signed over to a corporation Sante had set up. Now that they had the paperwork, there was only Irene herself that remained in their way. On the 5th of July 1998, Kenny pounced and dragged his 82-year-old landlady into his apartment.
Sante tasers her, rendering the poor woman utterly helpless. And then Kenny, ever keen to do his mother's bidding, strangles her. It was an act of the most grotesque malevolence. But yet further evidence of the extraordinary bond between mother and son.
Keen to please his mother, 23-year-old Kenny snuck Irene's all but 5-foot body into a duffel bag and drove it across the water into Hoboken, New Jersey, where he dumped her in a trash bin. The callous couple now had the wealthy socialite out of the way and the falsified deeds to her Manhattan townhouse. Their outlandish plan for Sante to fill the elderly millionaire's shoes appeared to be falling into place. Straight after the killing, they celebrated their latest scam.
They take themselves off to Trump Tower to have pastries and coffee. Kenny at one point reminisced and said, "These are the hands that have just been round the neck of Irene, and now they're round a cup of coffee." It is almost unbelievable. Inconceivable.
But for people who knew the New York socialite, her disappearance that Sunday afternoon was completely out of character.
She'd just completely gone off the radar. People were very quick to notice that. It was only a matter of hours that went by before somebody reported her missing to the police.
Soon, former NYPD detective Tom Hovergim was alerted by one of his patrolling officers.
Phone rang, I picked it up, and I had a patrol officer on the other end tell me about an elderly woman who is missing. The officer said that the staff was pretty insistent that she would never leave the townhouse, and she had difficulty walking, and if she did leave, she wouldn't leave by herself. So then it started to raise my suspicion a little bit more than the average missing person call.
When he arrived at Irene's home, Detective Hovergim was told about one of her new tenants, Manny Guerin, aka Kenny Kimes, who'd recently been acting strangely. The police even found him mentioned in Irene's notebook.
She knew something was not right with this guy. Irene made notes in regards to Kenny's behavior at the time and drawings, and even said that he looks like he should be in jail.
Meanwhile, a joint task force of the LAPD and FBI were pursuing the Kimes for the bad check on the stolen car and as chief suspects for the murder of David Kasdan. They'd found a criminal associate of the Kimes, Stanley. He'd previously supplied them with illegal guns, and the deadly duo had recently been in contact with him again.
They had called and said, Stan, we want you to come out to New York. We have a beautiful townhouse that you're gonna love. We're gonna have you be the caretaker. We want you to change some locks in the place and get rid of everyone that's in the townhouse.
The police and the FBI approach Stanley and say, if you help us pin down Sante and Kenny, whom they now clearly have a firm view are killers, we'll cut you a deal.
By coincidence, on the same day as Irene's murder, the task force had set up a sting to arrest the Kimes.
Stan helps them lure Sante and Kenneth Kimes to this Hilton Hotel on 6th Avenue. One of the things he had to do to let the police know that they were there was tip his hat.
The police stood on alert, but there was no sign of Sante or Kenny. They finally arrived over 6 hours late after dumping Irene's body.
Stanley takes his hat off, which is a clue, if these are the right people. So they're arrested.
Sante, who is carrying a black bag at the time, throws the bag on the floor and says, "This isn't mine." And then Kenny reacts by wetting himself. They had killed Irene literally a few hours before. This was possibly the first time in their lives that they'd been caught off guard.
In Sante's bag, they found 7 passports, 5 bank books, and numerous checks belonging to Irene. On Kenny, they found a forged social security card in Irene's name. The Kimes were taken into custody.
I think Kenny must have been feeling incredibly alone, like a fish out of water at this point in time, because he's separated from his mum. He's always looking for her to tell him what to do next. So he's feeling like his normal has just been tipped upside down.
At this stage, the investigators hadn't realized the significance of the paperwork belonging to Irene Silverman that they'd found on the Kimes. That is until the New York police team investigating Irene's disappearance held a news conference.
A detective heard the news conference early in the morning, and he heard the name Irene Silverman. So then they immediately called up and said, "Hey, I think we have a couple of people here you might want to speak to."
Now the police knew that Kenny Kimes and the mysterious Manny Guerin were one and the same. Irene's staff identified Kenny as Manny in a police lineup, and detectives obtained a search warrant for his apartment.
When we went in, we found a shower curtain was missing. We found several wigs. We also found a drug that is used to, they call it the date rape drug. It's used to knock people out. We also found papers with Irene Silverman's signature on it. Someone was practicing her signature. We found a to-do list written by Sante Kimes. Duct tape, rope, garbage bags. We were hoping Irene was still alive, but we had our doubts at that point. In a bag that they checked at the Plaza Hotel, we finally found the motive. The forged deed to Irene Silverman's townhouse. It was a huge piece of evidence.
Now that they had conclusively linked the Kimes to Irene Silverman, Detective Hovergim questioned 23-year-old Kenny.
I was talking about poor Irene and her missing and how her staff misses her. And I was trying to play on his emotions, trying to get him to feel sorry for her. At one point, I thought I had him. He started to tear up, he started to slouch, and I thought, this is it, he's gonna spill. Then all of a sudden, in snap of a finger, he became stone cold. Rigid, sat up, stone cold, and said, "I have no comment." That was it, he was done.
Even though Irene's body was never found, on the 16th of December 1998, at Manhattan Criminal Court, Sante and Kenny Kimes faced a total of 84 charges, including Irene's murder. It was a media circus, and Sante reveled in the spotlight. She seized the chance for yet another performance.
She went on 60 Minutes. She went on another news show and proclaimed her innocence, and it was so over the top. It just was ridiculous. Crying, carrying on. As God as my witness, we would never do anything like that. Why would we murder a sweet old woman?
The prosecution were missing one crucial piece of evidence: Irene's body.
We had a homicide without a body and all circumstantial evidence, but that circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. We had everything we needed, we just didn't have the body. I think we were all a bit nervous, but we knew we'd get a conviction. I mean, if you sat on a jury and listened to the presentation from the district attorney's office, without a doubt, these two people killed Irene Silverman.
Sante was finally convicted and sentenced to 120 years in prison. Kenny was given 125.
We were ecstatic. The only downside is that we never found Irene. I still feel bad about that to this day. But we got a conviction, and that was amazing.
But the story didn't end there. New evidence found during the search for Irene had allowed a case to be built against the duo for the murder of their second victim, David Kasdan. They were to be extradited to Los Angeles, where they could face the death penalty if found guilty.
Kenny is desperate that his mother shouldn't face the death penalty. In March 2001, he is transferred to California. Kenny decides the only way he can save his mother is to turn against her.
As part of a plea bargain deal, in order to avoid the death penalty, Kenny Kimes confessed to the earlier murders of Syed Bilal Ahmed and David Kasdan. Mother and son were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their victims finally saw justice.
The sentencing judge in California described Sante as one of the most evil individuals that she had ever encountered in her years on the bench. And I think that phrase can be applied to both of them. They were both evil individuals.
Almost 10 years later, on the 19th of May 2014, Sante Kimes died in prison. She was 79 years old. Even up to the end, she denied everything.
She was innocent in her mind to the day she died. Never remorseful for any of her actions.
Recently, her son, Kenny, however, has begun to show remorse.
He understands, what pain he caused people by taking away people he loved because he lost someone he loved and stuff. So I think Kenny finally gets it. Far too late. I have too much respect for the people who've been hurt by them to call him a victim. He is evil. That's why I hope he never gets out of prison.
They brutally killed two men who got in the way of their money-making scams. They conned and duped innocent victims out of thousands of dollars. They strangled an 82-year-old in order to steal her multi-million-dollar property. That's what makes Sante and Kenny Kimes two of the world's most evil killers. On the 1st of April 1990, Arizona State Trooper Michael Miller pulled to the side of Interstate 10 in Casa Grande to inspect a parked truck. When he peered through the windows of the cab, he couldn't believe what he saw. The face of a petrified woman chained up like an animal. He immediately handcuffed the truck driver and put him into his patrol car.
I think he was probably thinking, how am I going to get out of this one? What do I do now?
Way back to bed. Invite you back. I think that's about as far as I've ever gone.
Michael didn't know it yet, but he'd apprehended a cold-blooded serial killer, Robert Ben Rhodes.
He is without doubt one of the most dangerous men ever to have stalked the American highway.
For over a decade, Rhodes had been raping, torturing and killing vulnerable women across the country. But he'd remained completely undetected.
I think that Robert Ben Rhodes is probably the most evil person I've ever met in my life. And I've met a lot of evil people.
The police were only just discovering the gruesome crimes of Robert Ben Rhodes, one of the world's most evil killers. When 66-year-old Robert Ben Rhodes pleaded guilty to the murders of Douglas Iskowski and Patricia Walsh in March 2012, it took his official tally of victims to 3. But investigators suspect he's killed dozens more. It's believed that the long-distance truck driver was active from the mid-1970s. preying upon vulnerable hitchhikers and sex workers across America.
Rhodes's victims were people who would readily get into his truck. He wouldn't have to coerce them to do so. He's looking out for people who are vulnerable. He's looking out for people who need help from truck drivers and motorists. So these are individuals where he already has the access and he already has the opportunity.
It was a routine check of his parked trailer by an Arizona state trooper in April 1990 that led to Rhodes's dark secrets being revealed. The truck driver's horrific crimes may have been discovered accidentally, but it would take the ingenuity of 3 detectives across 2 states to help bring the serial killer to justice. Detective Michael Sheely first heard the name Robert Ben Rhodes while investigating a murder in Illinois.
He'd been a truck driver for a long time, and gave him a great deal of opportunity to find victims at local truck stops along the interstate, hitchhikers, which we know were victims. So he had a great deal of opportunity for such a predator as he was, and that's exactly the words that he is. He was a predator.
FBI Special Agent Bob Lee worked with Michael to find out more about Rhodes.
He not only kidnapped women, but he kept them and tortured them for as much as 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And that made him a special kind of evil as I saw him.
A decade after Rhodes had been imprisoned for murder in Illinois, Texas Ranger Brooks Long uncovered 2 more victims of Rhodes.
I would say that he had the ability to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He was able to coerce people to trust him and gain confidence in his good old boy laid-back attitude. But once he had their trust and their guard was down, then you saw the real Robert Ben Rhodes come into play.
The story of this transient killer begins in November 1945. Robert Rhodes was born in Council Bluffs, Iowa. He was mostly raised by his mother, as his military father, Ben, spent a lot of time overseas.
So there are periods of time when Rhodes's father is away from the family home, and I think there's a sense in which he perhaps misses him. There's a sense in which that the family feels incomplete, and there's a longing for an attachment to his father. But when his father returns, he's quite brutal, he's quite violent towards him. So I think he did feel this conflict about his relationship with his father all the time.
It was a relationship that soured further when Rhodes was a teenager.
When Rhodes was 16, his father was convicted for sexually assaulting a 12-year-old girl. So his father was essentially an abuser, and this behaviour was a reflection of a misogynistic value system that he had, that women and girls were there to be used and abused, that they served a function for men. And I think that was something that would have cemented itself in Rhodes's mind.
Ben was an army veteran and a firefighter. Could hardly be a more upright member of the community. So imagine the shame that would have fallen upon him for his arrest for sexually lascivious behaviour.
I think another important thing when we look at his father's conviction is his father's response to it. So he takes his own life shortly after he's convicted of this crime. And in this case, suicide is the ultimate act of control. It's the ultimate way of saying, I'm not going to take responsibility for my own actions. I'm going to decide to opt out of this whole thing altogether.
Was it that made the change to Rhodes's character? Was it that flicked the switch?
Rhodes was a college dropout who'd also failed in becoming a police officer. He went through numerous jobs and 2 failed marriages, never seeming to settle. By the late 1970s, though, he'd found the job that would define his murderous career.
Eventually, Rhodes finds a job that suits him down to the ground, and that's the job of a long-haul truck driver. So here he has long periods of time when he's unsupervised, he's off the grid, he doesn't have to answer to anybody. And here he gets the chance to spend long periods of time on his own, ruminating, fantasizing, and I think this is a very dangerous period in his life.
At the age of 41, Rhodes married his third wife, Deborah. But his sexual perversions would eventually lead to their separation.
Their relationship, she was disillusioned when the marriage went on because Rhodes wanted to go to a swinger club here in Houston. That was something that she didn't want to do, but he kept pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope.
Rather than just accepting that and saying, okay, that's fine, he pointed to her and said, well, clearly there's a problem with you. You need to loosen up. So this is showing me that his relationships, if you'd call them that, with women, they weren't based on mutuality or respect or love or affection. They were simply a way of him getting what he wanted.
Deborah admitted subsequently how badly she'd been abused by Rhodes, the man who thought nothing of handcuffing her to the bed or raping her so badly that she feared for her life. But it's undoubtedly true that that form of sexual abuse was the signature that was to develop throughout Rhodes' crimes.
Rhodes had an uncontrollable sexual appetite. Working as a long-distance truck driver presented him with the perfect opportunity to act out his aggressive sexual perversions on strangers he would meet along the road, with or without their consent.
I think it's important to emphasise here the term consent, because there are people who will consensually engage in this kind of behaviour. But when it came to Rhodes, he didn't care whether people consented to it or not. He wanted to do this, and whether or not people were happy with that was just completely disregarded.
In February 1990, a distressed young woman flagged down passing motorists. She claimed she'd been abducted by a truck driver and kept hostage for 2 weeks.
She was subject to torture, sexual assault and rape, and she actually had a leash round her neck when she was found by passing motorists. So this was a victim of Rhodes. This was somebody who had luckily managed to escape with her life.
The police drove the young woman across Houston looking for Rhodes' truck.
And they immediately started searching for it, and they found it, but when they brought Rhodes out to the car for her to look at him, she just looked down, would not identify him, said, "That's not him."
It was an opportunity to stop Rhodes that sadly wasn't taken.
Later that day, after they let him go, she told them that that was him, but she was too afraid to identify him, even though there were 2 police officers by her side. She had been completely terrorized and traumatized during the 2-week ordeal.
Rhodes is such a terrifying man that he puts literally the fear of God into this young woman. Now that must have even further confirmed Rhodes' absolute sense of invulnerability. It must have even further inflated his already overinflated ego.
A chance to put Rhodes safely behind bars had been missed. For now, he remained free to stalk the highways. By the spring of 1990, the 44-year-old had been living as a sexual predator and a murderer for over a decade, but nobody had any idea. His veneer of lies was about to come crashing down. On the 1st of April 1990, a state trooper named Michael Miller spied a truck on Interstate 10 in Casa Grande, Arizona.
I observed a truck parked on the side of the road with his emergency lights on, but he had no triangles out. So I went up alongside of the truck to pull behind the truck, had my lights activated, to go up and check on the driver of the truck and see what his situation was.
Armed with a flashlight, Michael took a look through the windows of the truck.
I saw some lights in the back of in the sleeper berth and peered in the window of the driver's side of the truck. And I shone my flashlight in. I heard a woman started screaming, and what I saw was a woman that looked like she had a horse bit in her mouth.
Shocked to see a woman with a metal restraint strapped to her mouth, Michael was even more surprised when a man appeared out of the darkness of the cab.
The driver came sliding out of the sleeper berth and then came on down to the pavement and put his hands up against the side of the truck. And he said, "That's okay, officer, everything's fine. We are consenting adults." And I still heard screaming coming from inside the truck. And he said, "I've got a gun in my rear pocket." And I patted him down, felt it, took it out, put it in my pocket, and then handcuffed him, took him back to my patrol car. I think he was probably thinking, how am I going to get out of this one? What do I do now?
With the man seemingly restrained, Michael headed back to the truck.
And when I got back up there and looked inside, I saw a completely naked female. And I took a blanket that was there and covered her up. Told her that she was okay, that the police were taking care of it, and the driver would not bother her anymore.
But had Michael waited a minute more, the man in his car, Robert Ben Rhodes, would have been free.
I went back to my patrol car, and Mr. Rhodes had gotten his handcuffs in front of him, and he was in the process of trying to get a key in his pocket to get his handcuffs off. If he'd have done that, he'd have been gone. He'd have fled the scene.
Robert Ben Rhodes was arrested and taken to Casa Grande Police Department.
Way back to bed. Invite me back. I think that's about as far as I've ever gone.
Detectives wanted to know more about the man whose home address was over 1,000 miles away in Houston, Texas, under the jurisdiction of FBI agent Bob Lee.
He had been arrested the night before, and they asked me to get some background information on Rhodes since he lived in Houston at the time.
The young girl had been through a traumatic ordeal at the hands of Rhodes.
When the victim was interviewed by the detective, she tells him that Rhodes agreed to give her a ride. She said that she fell asleep, and when she woke up, he had her chained in the sleeper compartment and was starting to take her clothes off. He had his truck modified. He had put some anchors on both sides of the sleeper where he could put handcuffs attached to a chain on her feet, and the same thing with her hands. But she also said that, you know, I was going to see the president. It makes you wonder what her grip on reality is. And then you take that back to the allegations she's made, and is that a credible statement?
I can't tell you, this broad is not playing for the fullback.
The mental state of the distressed woman meant there was a chance that Rhodes could walk free.
I think Rhodes believed he was going to get away with this because he very deliberately chose victims who were vulnerable. This particular victim had some mental health issues. She experienced delusions. But the police were very good at their jobs here, and they observed that this woman's story never changed. It was consistent, and that was what mattered.
Some of the things that helped corroborate her statement, she said that when Rhodes approached her, she was fighting, trying to get away from him. And said, I bit him on his shoulder.
Hey, can you remove your shirt from me? Do I have to? I prefer not.
And he had a bite mark on his shoulder. The case didn't go to trial. Rhodes agreed to enter a guilty plea on a plea bargain and got a reduced sentence on it.
In December 1990, Rhodes was sentenced to 6 years for the kidnap and sexual assault of the young woman. While Rhodes was in custody, Bob had begun to unearth the past of the 45-year-old truck driver.
Well, the first thing I did was check our national database for his criminal history, and I found he was a suspect in a previous kidnapping. I called the Houston Police Department and spoke to a detective in the sex crimes unit and obtained his report.
The report told the story of the woman who was raped and kidnapped but refused to identify Rhodes in February 1990. Bob was now aware of 2 cases where women had slipped through the grasp of Robert Ben Rhodes. But he was certain that searching the trucker's apartment would uncover any darker secrets.
I talked to the apartment manager. After she saw in the paper that he'd been arrested, she went up to his apartment to take a look and told me that she saw women's garments all over the apartment. He also had chains and handcuffs, and there was a white towel that had a lot of blood on it. There were some racks where he could chain somebody to.
The apartment bore all the hallmarks of a sexual predator.
I found a stack of photographs. I think they were in his dresser drawer. And it showed a young girl who was in various stages of dress. He had a lot of nude pictures of her. He had pictures of her chained up. And I could tell that he had held her for a while because on some of the photographs she had some bruises, but over time the bruises were changing color. So that told me that she had been captive for at least a week or so.
So they knew that at very least he has definitely harmed other women and at worst killed them, but they didn't have any actual cases to connect this evidence to. So this was the beginning of a very long investigation.
The pictures of the young girl preyed on Bob's mind.
I tried to identify the girl. I carried a picture with me, and every time I went to a different police department, I'd show it to the officers to see if any of them recognized her. Did they have a missing person case or anything like that?
In September 1990, over 800 miles away in Bond County, Illinois, reports of the discovery of a body landed on the desk of Detective Michael Sheely.
So I went out to this rural community and met with the sheriff out there, and he had told me that a local farmer was going to donate this particular barn to the fire department to burn down. And he was making a last-minute inspection and had found what he believed to be the remains of a human body.
The badly decomposed body was found up in the hayloft, and it was clear the victim had been murdered.
It was very apparent that there had been a wire garrote made, a ligature, if you will, to place around the victim's neck. And it's our belief that she was bound and handcuffed over a large beam that raised her hands up, and it's our belief that he placed a wire around her neck. Then he continued to squeeze that with this broken piece of board throughout and then strangled her to death.
And he twisted this ligature at least 16 times, according to the medical examiner. So he would not only have enjoyed torturing her, but he would have enjoyed watching her die.
A forensic anthropologist believed that the body had been in the barn for about 6 months.
The other thing he did is that he gave us gender identification, said it was the body of a young girl. He gave us an age range between 14 and 16 years old. He gave us hair color, which we thought would assist in the identification early on. What was alarming is we had approximately 950 missing female girls that fit her profile and fit the time of death. So it became overwhelming initially.
Michael sent out details of the victim to missing persons departments across the country. A detective in Pasadena, Texas, soon got back to him.
And she contacted me and she said that her victim, a runaway identified as Regina K. Walters, her family had received an anonymous telephone call after her disappearance saying that she had been left in a barn.
Regina's father receives a call on his unlisted number. So this is a number that isn't publicly available. Regina's one of the few people who actually know it. And he doesn't recognize the caller, but the caller tells him that he knows where Regina is, that she's in a barn, that he's cut her hair. And when her father asks, is she still alive, the caller hangs up.
So immediately, a lot of red flags that this really sounds like this could be our victim. And so I asked if she had dental records.
The dental records confirmed that the body belonged to Regina Walters, who was just 14 years old. Detectives could finally put a name to the face on the shocking photographs that had been found in Rhodes' apartment.
Well, the photographs, to identify the young person would have been impossible for me from being out there. But the barn that she entered, I knew every square foot of that barn. I had seen that barn for days and days. And so the minute I saw the photographs of her entering the barn and going into the barn loft and the beams, it just gave you that eerie feeling that that's exactly what had happened here. And so we were on to this case.
2 photos of Regina in particular were difficult to look at.
He had chronologically photographed her. The most telling for us was how he had taken photographs and staged her death, and had staged them during the course right before he'd killed her.
And looking in her eyes and looking at her face, you can tell that she's terrified. And at that point, she's just minutes from being killed. When you see a photograph like that, you have to control your emotions. It's a piece of evidence that you're looking at. You have to realize what your goal is. Your goal is to take this piece of evidence, tie it to someone, and be able to put that person in jail.
The story of how Regina Walters ended up in the truck of Robert Ben Rhodes is a tragic one.
Regina had a boyfriend, Ricky Jones, and she and Ricky decided to run away one day. They were out on the highway hitchhiking, and Rhodes stopped his truck and picked him up and took off with her, and that's the last that she was seen.
She's just really a beautiful, young, almost just totally normal 14-year-old girl with just a little rebellion streak. Unfortunately, she made the wrong decision.
Rhodes kept Regina prisoner in the makeshift torture chamber of his truck for 2 weeks. It's widely believed that he disposed of her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky, almost immediately. He was never seen again.
She was the prize, and the boyfriend was just surplus to requirements.
While the investigation into Regina's murder continued, Rhodes remained in prison for kidnap and sexual assault. But by early 1992, he was due out on parole.
So the clock was ticking for us to make a case against Rhodes.
Detectives in Texas and Illinois had been working together to build the case against Rhodes. If they didn't charge him soon, the dangerous killer would be released. Finally, they had enough evidence.
The district attorney in Bond County, Illinois, issued an arrest warrant for Rhodes for the murder of Regina Walters just prior to him being released from prison in Arizona. And Detective Sheely flew out to the prison to serve him with the arrest warrant and to bring him back to Illinois to face the charges.
Detective Michael Sheely remembers meeting Rhodes in the Arizona prison and confronting him with the evidence linking him to Regina.
He was cold, he was calculated. He didn't have any trouble looking you square in the eye and saying he's not involved. We provided him with the arrest warrant for murder. Still no reaction, nothing at all. And so I had a 8x10 photograph of Regina, and I put it on the table in front of him, turned it around, and I said, "This is your victim." And that was the first time any emotion out of him. But it wasn't an emotion of sorrow or an emotion of something that he had done. He was angry. And he got up and said that the interview was over. He wouldn't speak to us any longer.
At a court hearing on the 11th of September 1992, Rhodes agreed to a plea bargain. He admitted to murdering Regina Walters so he wouldn't have to face the death penalty.
The courtroom was packed, a great deal of spectators. There had been a lot of interest in this case because there was now speculation that he was a serial killer.
He didn't just plead guilty, he pled guilty with a smile. He was reveling in the trauma that he created. And for me, that shows that he was still very much the sexual sadist that he'd always been. This is somebody who hadn't changed whatsoever. And I think he enjoyed the opportunity to relive the details of these killings.
Regina Walters' family couldn't travel all the way from Texas to Illinois to be in the courtroom, but Michael Sheely made sure he conveyed their feelings to the killer.
As he was beginning to exit the courtroom, I just became overly aware, if you will, that there was no one there on behalf of Regina. And so I mentioned to him in a very small, faint voice as he began to pass me that it was certainly my pleasure that I was going to get to send him into prison for the rest of his life. And he was really upset at that comment and told me to get f***ed. And so maybe not as professional as I should have been, I returned and told him where he was going. I was hoping that that was going to happen to him. So that was my last real conversation with Robert Ben Rhodes. And looking back at it, I'm kind of glad that that's what I told him.
With Rhodes behind bars, investigations continued into possible victims of the killer. There were many missing persons who fitted his MO.
Rhodes would target his victims, generally people that either had mental deficiencies or heavy drug users that he picked up hitchhiking. He referred to them as lot lizards. These are, as he described, women that hang around truck stops to take care of the truckers or to swap sex for rides somewhere.
He is so itinerant. He literally crosses state line after state line after state line all over the United States. They aren't to know it, but when they climb into the cab of Rhodes' truck, their lives are to change forever.
In 2003, 11 years after Rhodes had been imprisoned for the murder of Regina Walters, Texas Ranger Brooks Long began investigating the disappearance of two hitchhiking newlyweds, Douglas Iskowski and Patricia Walsh, who'd been missing since January 1990.
They were both from Seattle, Washington. They had basically given up their personal belongings and were traveling to the East Coast of the United States primarily for religious reasons. The family searched extensively for them, but then the remains of Douglas were located around 1990, but there was not a formal identification of it being Douglas Iskowski till 1992 through dental records. So there wasn't much to go on. There was no witnesses. There were several suspects, but nobody was actually linked to the crime.
28-year-old Douglas's remains had been discovered in Crockett County, Texas. Brooks wanted to look at the ballistic evidence that had been found at the scene.
Mr. Ziskowski was shot multiple times in the head. He was shot with a Jennings J22 semi-automatic handgun. This information was obtained by not only the projectiles removed from his head, but also the casings that were left behind on the crime scene that were collected by law enforcement. So what was unique about the ballistic information was that the ammunition used in the murder of Mr. Ziskowski was very rare.
This Tarson-branded ammunition had a noticeable T on the casings. This fact had initially ruled Rhodes out as the potential killer.
The reason he was eliminated at that time was simply because the ammunition that was seized from Robert Ben Rhodes was marketed under the name of Armscore.
Brooks contacted the Casa Grande police to take a closer look at the ammunition that was found in Rhodes' truck when he was arrested for kidnap back in April 1990.
And when he called me, I asked him to open the Armscore box and to describe the head stamp on the casing. And he said it's a T. So that was the first clue that this is the guy, most probably is the guy, and we need to put efforts and resources into this because that all matched.
With a possible link between Rhodes and Douglas secured, Brooks gathered all the information he had on the killer and concentrated his efforts towards connecting Rhodes to Douglas's 24-year-old wife, Patricia Walsh.
She's probably out there somewhere, and they may not even know who she is because Douglas had no identification, he had no clothing. Regina K. Walters didn't have any identification, she didn't have any clothing. So when you looked at those two situations, what I started doing was looking for a red-headed female in her mid-20s that was probably naked and would have been shot with a Jennings J22 handgun with toss and ammunition.
Brooks received word of a possible unidentified body in Millard County, Utah.
So after I obtained that information, I reached out to the Millard County Sheriff's Office and inquired as to the status of that case. And what I was told by their chief deputy was, we haven't solved it, and the skeletal remains are actually inside our evidence vault. So I was able to tell him, I know who that victim is, and I also know who killed her.
Brooks was right. Dental records revealed that the remains belonged to Patricia Walsh.
Millard County had projectiles and had casings that matched. The same gun killed Douglas Ziskowski, killed Patricia Candace Walsh. So that was linked. Then the timeline on the records, we were able to determine that Rhodes was traveling westbound. So what made sense is he eliminated Douglas Ziskowski first.
Douglas was essentially just a barrier because Patricia was what Rhodes wanted. So he killed Douglas, he dumped his body very quickly, but he kept Patricia alive for 7 days, and he tortured her and he raped her before he eventually killed her and disposed of her body.
In 2003, 13 years after her remains had been found in Utah, Patricia Walsh had been identified. Another innocent victim of Robert Ben Rhodes.
Patricia must have been absolutely terrified during the days that she spent with Rhodes. And I think during this time, she probably tried to placate him, she probably tried to plead with him and interact with him. But there would be absolutely no reaction to that from Rhodes because this guy was essentially a killing machine. He wasn't affected by other people's trauma or emotion. He got off on people's fear. And I think the more afraid that Patricia was, the more he enjoyed it.
Investigators still needed to find some hard evidence that linked Rhodes to the newlywed hitchhikers before they could prosecute him with their murders.
So now became an analysis and comparison not only for DNA under Douglas Ziskowski, now there was analysis to be done and comparisons relating to Patricia Candace Walsh. And what had happened on that is eventually there was a match that was located on a white towel that was seized from Robert Ben Rhodes' truck that was matched to the DNA of Patricia Candace Walsh. So there was an affirmative link. The MO, the timeline, these things fit. And Rhodes was in custody. He was in jail in the state of Illinois.
By March 2012, Rhodes had served 20 years for the murder of Regina Walters, but he was due to be released. Now investigators needed to convince a grand jury that he was guilty of 2 more slayings before Rhodes was freed. Once again, the clock was ticking. Texas Ranger Brooks Long needed a jury to indict Rhodes based on the new facts he'd uncovered.
The Crockett County grand jury returned 2 indictments for capital murder on Robert Ben Rhodes for the murder of Douglas Scott Ziskowski and Patricia Candace Walsh, based on the evidence and the information that was presented. So essentially he was extradited and detained in the state of Texas, and as we were preparing for trial, he pled guilty to both cases and received multiple life sentences.
The killings of Douglas and Patricia took the number of Rhodes' known victims to at least 3. After working as a truck driver for over a decade, he'd honed his method of murder.
I think that Robert Ben Rhodes preyed on people that I think we coined the term later as disposable. He looked at people that had some checkered history, people that he believed wouldn't immediately be missed, And so I think he systematically profiled his victim, if you will. And I think he was very good at it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of those folks out there. And Rhodes knew that. He had an endless supply of people that he could prey on, and he did.
As far as Rhodes is concerned, any woman hitchhiking or working in a truck stop is fair game. And after all, who's going to miss them? It is a perfect combination. If you were to devise a fictional serial killer, Rhodes would be a very, very good example.
Brooks Long continued his search for victims of Rhodes. There was one obvious person to start with: Ricky Jones, the 18-year-old boyfriend of Regina Walters.
After the work had been done to identify who the killer was relating to Douglas Iskowski and Patricia Walsh, then there was resources put into myself in trying to locate Ricky Lee Jones. Because as I reviewed the file and reached out to officers and witnesses in that case, it was obvious that he had never been located. His remains had never been found.
Ricky had been missing since early 1990. Evidence found in Rhodes' truck when he was arrested in Arizona just weeks after that suggested that he could be the killer.
During the course of the search that was done by the FBI, there was a notebook that was found, a very, very alarming notebook where Rhodes had kept information. In that information, in that notebook, was phone numbers and family names. There was even a notation with a drawing of a knife with appeared to be like blood drops, and it said, "Ricky's dead. Ricky Jones is dead."
Brooks sent out information to police departments. He was desperate to locate Ricky.
We didn't get anything back from these agencies. But as I, on my own, started searching unsolved homicides and looking at various databases online, I essentially came across a young white male's remains that were found in Mississippi. I then reached out to law enforcement, and it was unfortunate because we were able to obtain some teeth from the remains in Mississippi, and we were able to obtain samples, biological samples from Ricky Lee Jones' biological mother, and those were compared and they were matched. So we knew that we'd located Ricky Lee Jones. The bad part about that was that the remains could not all be located. So Robert Ben Rhodes has never stood trial for the abduction and murder of Ricky Lee Jones, simply because there was a lack of evidence.
Despite not being able to link Rhodes to the crime, it is widely believed that he did kill the 18-year-old before murdering Ricky's girlfriend, Regina Walters. Investigators believe Rhodes is responsible for the deaths of many more innocent people.
This is a case that is unresolved. It's a case that's incomplete. There are going to be many, many families across America missing relatives who've been murdered by this individual, and they deserve justice.
I think during the course of the investigation, initially, we believed that it was probably in the neighborhood of probably 10 to 15. But as the investigation grew and the FBI spent a lot of time with it, the behavioral science unit spent a great deal of time and effort, and they had actually linked him up to approximately 45 homicides throughout the United States that not only fit his profile, but fit his timeline as well as a truck driver.
I don't think there's any doubt that there's other victims and there's other crimes that can be linked to Robert Ben Rhodes. I think that science and the ability to link potential suspects through DNA are somewhat limited in this case because of his MO and what he would do with those victims. But as other agencies become aware of Robert Ben Rhodes, hopefully some of this information will get back to the right investigator or officer or even family member that might be able to listen and say, hey, why don't you look at this guy?
Whatever the true number of victims, there could have been many more had it not been for a chance encounter on the side of the I-10 in Casa Grande, Arizona, in April 1990.
The most striking moment in the case is that wonderful Arizona Highway Patrol officer coming upon this rig with its hazard lights flashing, climbing up, looking through the window, and seeing a young woman trapped in the car who starts screaming. That was the moment in which finally Rhodes's extraordinary run of killing came to an end.
And had that officer not gone to check on that truck, he could well be killing people right now.
I had a phone call from her many years ago. She thanked me for saving her life. I said, well, hey, you're just doing my job. You enjoy your life and have a good one. I'm glad you have a life to have.
Robert Ben Rhodes remains safely behind bars at the Minard Correctional Center in Illinois. He will never be released from prison.
I think that Robert Ben Rhodes is probably the most evil person I've ever met in my life. And I've met a lot of evil people.
I hesitate and always have hesitated to use the word monster, but Rhodes certainly deserves to be called a monster.
I dealt with many murderers, but of all of those, the one that stands out as far as the lack of emotion, the lack of remorse, he wins the prize by far. There is no feeling to this man. There is no inkling of remorse. There's no inkling of anything. The only regret he has is that he got caught.
Robert Ben Rhodes is a cold-blooded sexual predator who preyed upon vulnerable women for his own self-gratification. He would chain his victims in his truck and torture them before disposing of their lifeless bodies in the most callous manner. Only Rhodes knows exactly how many people he has killed, and his reluctance to give closure to the loved ones of his victims undoubtedly makes him one of the world's most evil killers.